Kleenex. So and I have my Bible, so we're ready to go. We're ready to go. We are trying to wrap up very soon a study in Joshua. And let me go ahead and apologize tonight. What I gave you last time was somewhat accurate. I meant to wrap it up tonight, and I've been just thinking about chapter 22, and I didn't want to go over it, but it just wasn't clicking until a day or so ago, and it started clicking. So next week, read Joshua 23 through 24. We will finish up, unless things change, we'll finish up next week with this study. But for tonight, I wanted us to go to Joshua chapter 22. Joshua chapter 22 is an absolutely fascinating chapter, and it's a little alarming, to be honest with you, because it tells us something about what a passion that we need to have that I think is sorely missing in our world today with people I come in contact with, and myself included. I'm certainly not putting myself up on a pedestal. Joshua had a passionate faith. And by that I simply mean zealous faith. A zealous faith. Over and over again, God talks about people who had zeal for Him, and they were commended because of that. Now that zeal may look different in different kinds of situations, but the bottom line of all these zealous faiths is that they wanted to please God and do what God had commanded. That's the bottom line. Do what God says to do. Now, let me give you a little very, very quick kind of a introduction of what we're doing tonight. Chapters 13 through 21 of the book deal with basically the division of property in the Canaan region, in that promised land that God promised. We didn't go through every chapter like that because it's easy. I mean, it's very straightforward. And if you get you a map, or a good Bible map, you can kind of see where each tribe is located. And when they are talking about like Gad or Reuben or Simeon, they're not talking about a person. They are talking about a tribe, because these people, the fathers of these tribes are gone. They're dead. They were sons of Jacob. But one of the things I think is very important, and while you're in chapter 22, go back one chapter. Go back one chapter. Go back to chapter 21, just as an introduction. And I know this is small for some of you to read, but I want you to look at chapter 21, starting in verse 43 through 45. It said, "So the Lord gave Israel all the land which He had sworn to give to their fathers, and they possessed it, and they lived in it. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, according to all He had sworn to their fathers. And not one of all their enemies stood before them. The Lord gave all their enemies into their hand." This is the most just foundational verse. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. There is so much that we could unpack with that, particularly with those people who talk about Israel is going to rise up one of these days, and Jesus is going to come and set up his kingdom and all this stuff. However, they'll never talk about this verse that says everything that God promised came to pass. Because you'll hear over and over again people talking about, well, God didn't fulfill all those promises. God didn't do that. Yes, he did. He did everything he said he was going to do. But the faithfulness of God is what they're banking on. The faithfulness of God stands in contrast of them not being faithful all the time. Because even though they had conquered the land, even though God had not failed in his faithfulness, their lack of faith kept them from driving out all the people that they were supposed to drive out as commanded by God. And he was not happy with that. So there was a challenge in the next few chapters. In chapter 22, in tonight's chapter, he's going to talk about true worship. In chapter 23, he's going to talk about a farewell address. And then in chapter 24, he's going to talk about renewing that covenant, being committed in faithfulness. And that's what we're going to talk about next time, commitment to faithfulness. But tonight we're going to talk about worship. We're going to talk about the importance of how we worship and why we do what we do. Number one, the first section. There are basically four sections. I've cut this chapter into four parts. Number one is commending, challenging, and blessing. The first 9 verses. And let's just start reading, and I'll stop very quickly. Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, "You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and you have listened to my voice in all that I've commanded you. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days to this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers, as he spoke to them. Therefore turn now and go to your tents, to the land of your possession, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan," or east side of the Jordan. Get this verse, very important. "Only be very careful to observe the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." We'll stop there. Let me tell you a little bit about the background of where this came from. It referred to Moses. During Moses' lifetime, and I've shown you this on a map several times, during Moses' lifetime, they conquered the east side of the Jordan. Remember, there were 3 tribes, or 2.5 tribes really, Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, because Manasseh was so massively large, they got 2 portions of inheritance. But those 2.5 tribes asked for their inheritance on the east side of the Jordan, and God granted that. But God said, "You are commanded to help your brothers go across the Jordan and conquer their inheritance, and then you can go back home. Joshua in chapter 1, if you'll remember chapter 1, Joshua told the 2.5 tribes and reminded them of what God had commanded and said, I am going to hold you to your oath to help your brothers. So Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh went across, and they have been fighting with their brothers to gain control of the west side of Canaan, the promised land. Now it seems as though everything's done. God has given them rest. Now, it doesn't mean that all the Canaanites have been driven out, but in general, the place has been conquered. Not necessarily settled, but conquered. So they have fulfilled their agreement. Now, let me show you this map very quickly. You see the east side, the right side, Manasseh, that's half the tribe of Manasseh. You see right across to the west, or the left of it, the other part of Manasseh. You see Gad, and you see Reuben. I also want to show you, while I've got the map up, you've got the Moabites to their south. You've got the Ammonites to their east, and you've got other foreign countries to their north. So they are bounded by foreign countries, okay? But I also want to show you this. The Jordan River goes right down the middle, and on the west side, where the arrow goes, is in the region of Ephraim, where their inheritance lies. There is a place called Shiloh. Shiloh is about half the way from Gilgal, which has been their kind of home base during these fights, and Shechem up there in the southern part of Manasseh. You remember Shechem is where Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim was. So about halfway between Gilgal and Shechem is Shiloh. Shiloh is where the tabernacle is right now. It's where the priests are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And this is where this meeting that they're about to have is taking place. So I just wanted to show you that, because when these 3 or 2.5 tribes leave Shiloh to go back home, they're going to be leaving from Shiloh and going toward the Jordan River. Now that's all the geography lesson I'm going to give you. Okay, so let me go back now. So what he's going to do is this. He's going to commend them for fulfilling their charge. They promised to help their brothers. They've done that. And he is praising them for obeying the word of the Lord. He's also going to admonish them. You remember verse 5. He is going to admonish them to remain faithful. I told you that's the crux of chapter 23, chapter 22 through 24, is to remain faithful. Why is he doing this? Because we have a tendency when we walk away from worship, when we get finished with Sunday, Monday comes. And we're away from all the hubbub of people maybe encouraging us, and we become a little bit more isolated. We become a little bit more remote, and our minds start to wonder about this and this and this, and maybe take our minds off of God. So over and over, Joshua was trying to remind them to remain faithful with all their hearts. They were going to have some special challenges. Now think about where they are. They are on the east side of the Jordan. They are, the west side of the west side, they're going to be bounded by what? Mediterranean Sea. Okay? Not a lot of foreign nations over here. But they're going to be, these 2.5 tribes are going to be very much influenced by the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Hittites above them. They're going to be very, very influenced by those if they do not keep their focus on God. They're going to possibly be tempted to feel isolated. And that causes you to search out that companionship that they should not have with the foreign nations. Also, they will be tempted to maybe participate in some of the worship that these nations had. So he knew that they were going to have some very specific temptations. Now, putting that aside, he ends with a pronouncement of blessing. And one of this blessing is going to not only be a spiritual blessing, but it's also going to be a very a physical blessing. You'll notice in verse 8, it talked about dividing spoils. Now remember, only a couple of places have been totally under the ban, which is totally given to God. Most of these places, God said, kill the inhabitants, but you take the spoils. And now he's talking about spoils such as, and let me find it here, much livestock, verse 8, great riches, silver, gold, bronze, iron, and many wardrobe clothes. Gobs of stuff. And all the brothers, because they help their brothers gain access to their inheritance, they get to divide the spoils. So they have a lot of things that they're taking to their home. Their home, okay? So the first one is a commendation, a challenge, and a blessing. You did a great job. I want to make sure that you remain faithful and you get the wonderful riches of your labor. Okay? Now, let's think about this. 10 through 14 talks about building an altar. It says, verse 10, when they came to the region of the Jordan, so they have left Shiloh, and it's not too far to the Jordan, and they get to the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan. The sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh build an altar there by the Jordan, a large altar in appearance. In appearance. One of the things that I think is fascinating, by the way, I do want to mention this also. I don't think I said this. When he talks about the land of Canaan, he's talking about the west side, what we call the promised land. They've been fighting in there. The east side is called the land of Gilead. The land of Gilead, which, by the way, Gilead means heap of testimony or witness. Just remember that. I'll come back to it in a minute. Okay, so they say, we've got a great idea. We're going to build a great big altar. We're going to great, and they did it on the west side of the Jordan. The west side of the Jordan, not the east side of the Jordan. All of a sudden, things start popping. Verse 11. The sons of Israel, the west side, heard about it and started saying something very, very tough. Verse 12. When the sons of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel gathered themselves at Shiloh to go up against them in war. Now you sit there and go, wait a minute, what? What happened? You got 2.5 tribes just left. They've just been commended. They've just been blessed. And all of a sudden, you're ready to go to war with your own brothers? What's going on? Well, I want you to think about something just a minute. They have built an altar, and verse 28 uses the word copy. Copy. So you kind of extrapolate from the text that they have done a replica of the brazen altar that is in the tabernacle courtyard in Shiloh. Now, Shiloh is where God said worship. God said it. It is authorized. All of a sudden, they're building an altar somewhere else. And you say, well, isn't that nice? They're going to worship there. No, absolutely not. If you will look, write it down, you can look later, at Deuteronomy chapter 12, God was extremely direct about you worship where I tell you to worship. Over and over again, we're faced with a lot of problems. People like to use excuses and say, well, I want to worship the way I want to worship, and God will be pleased with it. And God tells us, Deuteronomy 12, Deuteronomy 13, this chapter, you worship how God wants you to worship. You don't vary from that. You don't use unauthorized worship in unauthorized ways. God tells us exactly the way He wants us to worship Him. God prohibited altars except the ones He sanctioned in the Old Testament. Not only that, in chapter 13 of Deuteronomy, if you see someone doing this, what do you think the punishment was going to be? Deuteronomy 13, 12 through 18. You assemble yourselves and you go to war with these people and wipe them out. Wipe them out. So, when I first read chapter 22, if I don't have that as a background, I start thinking, wow, that's a knee-jerk reaction. That was weird. Why would they do that? Because God had commanded them to. They're doing exactly what God told them to do. So here they are, and they are on the warpath. Don't want to do this, but they're willing to go through with it because they are commanded by God to do so. If you will also look in chapter 13, starting in verse 14, I think, it says, but before you go to war, you research and inquire thoroughly before you do so. So what do the Israelites do? They send a delegation. They send a delegation to say, what in the world are you guys doing? Before they go to war, they're not impulsive. They're not attacking. They're not asking questions later. They're sending a delegation to find out, what are you doing? And why are you doing this? They're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I really appreciate that idea. This is God's doing. Israel didn't come up with this. God told them, this is how you handle things like that. Don't just assume and take off. Well, the delegation was Phinehas, who was the high priest at the time, and one of each tribe, now there's 9.5 over here, so it would be 10 rulers, are going to go with him to be a witness in the negotiations and find out what's going on. So here they are, and they're doing this delegation. So now they're going to confront. They're going to confront what's going on. In verse 16, look at verse 16. Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what is this unfaithful act which you have committed against the God of Israel, turning away from following the Lord this day, by building yourselves an altar to rebel against the Lord your God this day? One of the things, I kept saying, when God says this is authorized, that means none of the others are authorized. If God authorizes this, you don't go over here and do this. I don't care what the motive is. I don't care what anything is. And that's what they're trying to find out. What are you doing? Why have you broken faith? You can't change the pattern of worship. They either thought that they were going to worship God at this altar, which was unauthorized and not allowed, or that they were going to go and start worshiping idols. So what happened? What happened? The delegation then comes and verse 17, is not the iniquity of Peor enough for us? I don't have time to talk about a lot of this, but I will say this about it. The delegation warns them, you can't build an altar, and they look to Peor. Write down Numbers 25. Numbers 25. Numbers 25 is where the children of Israel come up, and Balaam talks these Moabite women into seducing the men of Israel. And there are a lot of men who are seduced by these women. And they start worshiping idols, and they start committing the fornication and all the things that went in with their idolatry worship. And he's going to say basically to them, don't you remember what it's like when you don't obey God? Anybody happen to remember what happened? God sent a plague because of their evil. And do you know how many people died? 24,000. Don't tell me God is not serious about sin. 24,000 people died. I'm not going to go into great detail. We don't have time tonight. But by the way, Phinehas, who is here, right here, at this delegation, had a part to play in Numbers 25. Please read that. It's fascinating how Phinehas, who took a major part of that one and basically turned God's anger away single-handedly, is part of this negotiation. They know that Phinehas means business. Look at what he did back in the Numbers 25. So Phinehas is talking to them and says, don't you remember Peor? Don't you remember Achan in chapter 7 of Joshua? Here, Achan did something, and who got the penalty for it? Not only Achan, but his family and the nation, until they punished him for that, breaking the commands. The whole nation was disciplined because of that. And he said, you're doing what you're doing. It's going to bring God's anger and wrath on us. And they make a plea. And you've got to read this. You've just got to read this. I love how they are so wanting, these people, to do what's right. They said, let me tell you something. If moving over there to the east of the Jordan is going to cause you problems, then come back to the west. We'll give up some of our territory. Look at it. We will give you places in our territory to live so that you can sin. Would we be willing to do that? Would we be willing to give up stuff of our own so that people wouldn't have the temptations in different places to sin? I love that about Phineas and what they're wanting to do. So number 4 is the explanation. They said, this is it. Now it's your time to talk. Now it's your time to talk. And they said in verse 21 through 29, look, verse 22, the mighty one, God the Lord. The mighty one, God the Lord. What he's doing is he's saying, El, Elohim, Jehovah. El, Elohim, Jehovah. He's repeating this three combination name of God to say, what I'm about to tell you is the truth. You need to listen to it, and you need to listen to it very carefully. We did not resurrect. Let me get to the next thing. Oh, I didn't do it. We did not resurrect this altar as an altar. We didn't resurrect this altar to give offerings. We are not going against God. In fact, we did this because we're afraid that future generations of our tribes are going to feel isolated and feel like they are not a part of the Western worship of God, the true God. We're afraid of that. So we wanted this to be a memorial. They had the right intentions. They had the right motivations. They were unwise in how they did it. Because when you looked at the thing, what did the people say? It was an altar. So what did you expect? What did you expect people to assume? That you're doing wrong. Well, they were very, very specific about what their intentions were. And the people, verses 30 through 34, Phineas and the other leaders, excuse me, the Phineas and other leaders were very pleased and very satisfied that these people had not, and relieved that they were not rebelling, that they were not committing treachery against God, that they were still committed to God. And they were overjoyed, and they went back and they explained it to the other tribes, and they were happy with it too. And that memorial was called Witness. What did I say the Gilead means? Witness. This was a witness between them and the tribes that God is the true God. Now, let's just do a few lessons. Number 1, we need a passionate faith. We need a passionate faith to worship God as He commands us to worship. I could spend the hours on this. We need a passionate faith to do what pleases God. It has nothing to do with what pleases me. It has nothing to do with what makes me feel good. I should be just on my knees begging God each day. I pray that I am doing exactly what you're wanting me to do. We, with passionate faith, we need to rebuke and oppose those who sin. We need to rebuke and oppose those people who are doing the things that are not right. It draws other people away from God, their focus away from God. We need to communicate when things do seem off, wrong, sinful. We need to communicate with those people. December. Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 14 says, you need to, and I wrote this down, investigate, search out, and to inquire thoroughly. Because maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they don't need a rebuke at all. Maybe it was just an action that was probably not wise in judgment. We need to be able to communicate, to understand. And then number 4, we need to rejoice and be unified when people tell us that's not my intent and I want to worship God the way God wants. We need to be sure we need to be sure that we're doing what God wants us to do. I'm about to lose it, so let me just finish up here. An extra lesson here is that sometimes distance weakens those relationships. It did start weakening the relationships between the tribes, and they were not as unified as they needed to be. Sometimes actions taken with the best of motives for even worthy purposes can result in worse and not better conditions. We have to be careful. Just because an action seems to be right, it's loud, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best judgment. And sometimes things that just seem like a wonderful idea can easily be misinterpreted. Faith requires us to have zeal. It requires us to have passion, but we also need to have zeal along with knowledge of trying to please God. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this day and the blessings you give. Thank you for watching over us and caring for us. And thank you for this time that we have. Thank you for this chapter that tells us that we need to be passionate about pleasing you, about wanting you to get the glory, and about us wanting unity, but only as you define unity, only as you define what it means to be a child of God. Thank you for this wonderful, wonderful blessing that we have in Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.